All the staff avoided the rude billionaire until the new waitress stood her ground. What if I told you that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything? In a world where money often talks louder than kindness, one young woman's simple refusal to bow down would shake the foundations of an entire restaurant. Picture this. Every morning at Grandpa Joe's diner, the staff would whisper warnings to each other. "He's coming in at noon," they'd say, their voices dropping to hushed tones. "Just keep your head down and get through it." For 3 years, a powerful businessman had made their workplace a place of dread, his sharp words cutting deeper than any knife. Servers would call in sick rather than face him. Managers would hide in the back office. But on one ordinary Tuesday morning, a new waitress tied her apron strings and had no idea she was about to change everything. Her name was Elena, and she had never learned to stay quiet when something was wrong. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Elena Rodriguez arrived at Grandpa Joe's diner on a crisp autumn morning, her worn sneakers squeaking against the checkered linoleum floor. AT-34, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had worked hard for everything she owned. The faded family photo tucked into her apron pocket showed her 2 young children. The reason she'd taken this job after her husband's construction accident left them scrambling to pay medical bills. "Listen, honey," said Betty, the head waitress, whose silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Betty had worked at Grandpa Joe's for 15 years, and her kind eyes held a warning. "There's something you need to know about Tuesdays and Thursdays." She glanced toward the large corner booth by the window. "We get a regular customer, and well, he's difficult." The other staff members gathered around, their faces reflecting a mixture of sympathy and shared experience. Jake, the cook, whose gentle hands had flipped thousands of pancakes, wiped his palms on his apron nervously. "He owns half the commercial buildings in town," he explained quietly, "including the one our landlord rents from E.T. Elena listened as they painted a picture of a man who treated service workers like they were invisible, who snapped his fingers for attention and never said please or thank you. He would send food back multiple times, complain about everything from the temperature of his coffee to the shine on his silverware, and leave messes that took extra time to clean. Last month, he made Jessica cry so hard, she quit the next day. Betty continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl was only 19, working to pay for nursing school. He called her worthless over a 2-minute wait for his eggs. Elena felt something stir in her chest, a familiar feeling she'd carried since childhood when she'd watched her immigrant parents work multiple jobs while being treated poorly by employers who knew they were desperate. "What exactly does he do?" she asked. "It's not what he does," said Mike, the assistant manager. "It's how he makes you feel, like you're nothing, like your dignity doesn't matter." Mike's hand shook slightly as he spoke. "We've all learned it's easier to just endure it. Management says we need the business, and he always pays his bill." As Elenina tied her apron strings, she thought about her children sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, trusting that Mama would find a way to make everything okay. She thought about her husband Louise working through pain at physical therapy, determined to get back to providing for his family. She thought about all the people who had swallowed their pride and dignity just to survive. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Betty's face went pale. Through the window, Elena could see a sleek black sedan pulling into the parking space marked reserved for Mr. Davidson. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his cold eyes already scanning the restaurant with the look of someone who expected disappointment. "He's early today," Betty whispered, quickly smoothing her uniform. "Elena, just please don't make any waves on your first day. We all need these jobs." But as Elena watched the man approach the entrance, she felt her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "Mija, your dignity is the one thing no one can take from you unless you give it away." The bell chimed again as Alexander Davidson stepped inside, his presence immediately casting a shadow over the warm atmosphere of Grandpa Joe's diner. AT-42, he carried himself with the cold confidence of a man who believed his wealth exempted him from basic human decency. His tailored suit probably cost more than Elena made in 3 months, but there was something hollow in his eyes that expensive clothes couldn't hide. Without acknowledging anyone, he strode to his usual corner booth and seated himself with the air of a king claiming his throne. The entire staff seemed to hold their breath collectively. Betty approached his table with practiced caution, her notepad ready. Coffee black. And this time, make sure the cup is actually clean, Davidson said without looking up from his phone. Last week, there was a water spot on the rim. Unacceptable. Betty nodded quickly, retreating to the coffee station where her hands trembled slightly as she poured. Elalina watched this interaction with growing discomfort, remembering how her own mother had come home from cleaning office buildings, exhausted and sometimes tearful from similar treatment. When Betty returned with the coffee, Davidson barely glanced at it before pushing it away. This is barely warm. How difficult is it to serve hot coffee? Are you people incapable of the most basic tasks? Elena saw Betty's shoulders sag, and something inside her chest tightened like a coiled spring. She'd seen this look on her mother's face too many times. The look of someone swallowing their dignity bite by painful bite. I'll get you a fresh cup right away, sir, Betty said softly, reaching for the offending mug. Obviously, Davidson replied with a dismissive wave. And when you do, perhaps you could remember that I prefer service that doesn't require multiple attempts to get right. As Betty hurried past Elena toward the coffee station, Elena could see the moisture gathering in the older woman's eyes. The sweet woman who always asked about Elalina's children, who had shared her homemade cookies during yesterday's training, who had worked faithfully for 15 years, was being reduced to tears by a man who probably spent more on lunch than she made in a week. Elena found herself moving before she consciously decided to. She intercepted Betty at the coffee station, gently taking the pot from her hands. Let me handle this, she said quietly. Elena. No, Betty whispered urgently. You don't understand. He could get us all fired. His company owns the building, and if he complains to management. But Elena was already walking toward Davidson's table, the coffee pot in her hand, and her grandmother's voice still echoing in her mind. She thought about her children, yes, but she also thought about what kind of world she wanted them to grow up in. A world where kindness mattered, where dignity wasn't negotiable. Davidson looked up as Elena approached, his expression shifting to one of mild annoyance at seeing a new face. Who are you? He asked curtly. I'm Elena, she said, meeting his gaze directly. I'll be serving you today. As she poured his coffee, she could feel the eyes of every staff member on her. The restaurant had gone unusually quiet, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Davidson took a sip of the fresh coffee and immediately frowned. Too hot now, he said dismissively. Does no one in this place understand the concept of proper temperature? That's when Elena did something no one expected. She sat down across from him. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the sizzle of bacon on Jake's grill seemed to quiet as Elena settled into the booth across from Alexander Davidson. His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening slightly as if he couldn't quite process what was happening. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of disbelief. What exactly do you think you're doing? Elena folded her hands on the table, her voice calm but firm. I'm sitting down for a moment because I want to talk to you like one human being to another. Davidson's face flushed red with indignation. You cannot simply sit at my table. I am a customer, and you are the help. Get up immediately and get your manager. My name is Elena Rodriguez, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. I'm 34 years old. I have 2 children, ages 8 and 10. My husband was injured at work and we're struggling to pay his medical bills, so I need this job, but not badly enough to watch good people be treated like they don't matter. Something flickered across Davidson's face. Surprise, perhaps even confusion. I don't care about your personal problems, he said, but his voice had lost some of its sharp edge. This is completely inappropriate behavior. Elena leaned forward slightly. That woman you just spoke to so rudely? Her name is Betty. She's worked here for 15 years. She has grandchildren she odd airs, and she bakes cookies for the staff because she treats this place like a family. She's probably forgotten more about hospitality and kindness than most people ever learn. Davidson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I come here for a meal, not a therapy session.
Why?
Elena asked simply. Why do you come here? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean why? I come here because the food is adequate and it's convenient to my office. There are a dozen restaurants closer to your office, Elena pointed out. More expensive places where the service would meet your standards. So why here? Why do you keep coming back to a place where you're clearly never satisfied? For the first time since Elena had met him, Davidson seemed at a loss for words. His fingers drummed against the table, and she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A faded tan line on his ring finger, as if a wedding band had recently been removed. That's none of your business, he said finally. But the fight had gone out of his voice. Elena's expression softened slightly. You're right, it's not, but I know what it looks like when someone is in pain and doesn't know how else to express it except by making others feel small. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft clatter of dishes and muted conversations from other tables. Davidson stared at his coffee cup, his jaw working as if he was fighting some internal battle. My ex-wife used to say I was impossible to please, he said suddenly, so quietly. Elena almost didn't hear him. Maybe she was right. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Elena felt her heart soften, recognizing the pain behind his confession. But before she could respond, the front door chimed, and Mike, the assistant manager, hurried over with panic written across his face. Mr. Davidson, I'm so sorry, Mike said, reaching for Elena's arm. She's new, and she doesn't understand the protocols yet. Davidson looked up at Mike, then back at Elena, and for a moment the entire restaurant held its breath, waiting to see which way this moment would fall. Alexander Davidson raised his hand to stop Mike from pulling Elena away. The gesture was so unexpected that the assistant manager froze mid-motion, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. The entire restaurant seemed suspended in time, every customer and staff member sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Actually, Davidson said slowly, his voice carrying a strange new quality, I think I'd like to hear what she has to say. Mike looked between them frantically. Sir, I assure you this won't happen again. We can have your usual server. I said, leave us alone. Davidson interrupted, but without his usual venom. Mike retreated quickly, leaving Elena and Davidson facing each other across the worn vinyl booth. Helena studied the man before her, seeing past the expensive suit and cold exterior to something raw and vulnerable underneath. When my husband got hurt, she said gently, I was so angry at the world that I took it out on everyone around me. My kids, my friends, even the grocery store clerks. It felt easier to be angry than to admit how scared and helpless I felt. Davidson's hands stilled on the table. I'm not scared, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Of course not, Elena agreed. You're successful, powerful, wealthy. What would you have to be scared of? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the dark coffee. My wife left me 8 months ago, he said finally. She said I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone cold and impossible to love. Elena waited, sensing there was more. She was right, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I built an empire, made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be human. I forgot how to treat people with basic decency. Oh, why do you keep coming here? Elena asked again, her tone gentle but persistent. Davidson lifted his eyes to meet hers, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Tears threatening to spill over. Because it's the last place where I remember being happy. Before the money, before the power, before I became this, he gestured at himself with disgust. My father used to bring me here when I was 10 years old. Every Sunday after church, he'd order pancakes and tell me stories about his own childhood. He was a good man, kind, humble. He would be ashamed of what I've become. Elena felt her heart breaking for this broken man who had forgotten his own humanity. It's not too late, she said softly. You're still here. You still come back to this place because some part of you remembers who you used to be. Davidson wiped his eyes quickly, looking around to ensure no one had seen his moment of vulnerability. I don't know how to change, he admitted. I've been angry for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. It starts with one choice, one moment of kindness instead of cruelty. One please or thank you. One apology to people you've hurt. Davidson looked down at her hand covering his. And for the first time in months, he felt something other than the constant cold anger that had consumed him. He felt hope. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. He looked up at Betty, who was watching nervously from across the restaurant, and took a shaky breath. The next few minutes would determine whether redemption was possible, or if he was too far gone to find his way back to the man his father had raised him to be. Alexander Davidson stood up slowly from the booth, his legs unsteady, as if he were learning to walk again. Every eye in the restaurant followed him as he approached Betty, who instinctively took a small step backward, her years of conditioning preparing her for another harsh encounter. "Betty," he said, and something in his voice made her look up in surprise. Gone was the sharp, demanding tone she'd grown to dread. "I owe you an apology." "A sincere one." Betty's eyes widened, her hand moving unconsciously to her heart. "Sir, I've been coming here for 3 years," Davidson continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "and in all that time, I've never once treated you with the respect you deserve. You've been nothing but professional and kind, and I've repaid that with rudeness and cruelty. I'm deeply sorry." The coffee pot in Betty's hand began to tremble. Around the restaurant, conversations had stopped entirely. Jake peered out from the kitchen, his spatula forgotten in his hand. "You didn't deserve any of the things I said to you," Davidson went on. "Not today, not ever. You're clearly a woman of great character, and this place is lucky to have you." Tears spilled over Betty's cheeks, but these were different tears than the ones Elena had seen earlier. These were tears of validation, of a dignity restored. "Thank you," she whispered. That means more than you know." Davidson turned to address the entire restaurant. "I owe all of you an apology," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I've used my position and my money as weapons to make other people feel small, and that was wrong. Inexcusably wrong." He walked to the kitchen window where Jake stood watching in amazement. "The food here has always been excellent," Davidson told him. "I complained because I was angry at my own life, not because there was anything wrong with your cooking. I should have said thank you instead." Jake's face broke into a smile, so wide it seemed to light up the entire kitchen. "Thank you, sir. That's mighty kind of you to say." Elena watched from the booth, her heart full as she witnessed this transformation. She thought about her children and realized she would have quite a story to tell them tonight about courage, forgiveness, and the power of treating others with dignity. Davidson returned to the booth one final time, reaching for his wallet. But instead of leaving his usual minimal tip, he placed several hundred bills on the table. "This is for Betty," he said to Elena. "And for you, not as charity, but as a small acknowledgement of the gift you've given me today." "The gift?" Elena asked. "You reminded me who I used to be," he said simply. "Who I can still choose to be." As Davidson walked toward the door, he paused to shake hands with several customers, apologizing for any disruption. At the entrance, he turned back one final time. "I'll see you next Tuesday, Betty," he called out. "And I promise you won't recognize the man who walks through that door." After he left, Elena felt Betty's arms wrap around her in a fierce hug. "Thank you," the older woman whispered. "Thank you for giving us all our dignity back." Elena smiled, thinking once again of her grandmother's words. Sometimes the smallest act of courage really could change everything. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovering that it's never too late to choose kindness over cruelty, and that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.